Hunter was never meant to be loved. He was meant to be admired, polished like a trophy and placed neatly into his mother's carefully curated world. From the moment he could walk without tripping over his own shoelaces, Senator Martha Whitmore trained him to smile at flashing cameras, shake hands firmly with strangers, and recite polite answers as though his life depended on them. Maybe it did. Maybe it always had. Inside their stately home, everything gleamed. Polished mahogany floors, heavy velvet drapes, chandeliers whose light was colder than the winter sun. Martha would glide from room to room, rehearsing speeches, adjusting Hunter's tie before charity galas, reminding him which version of himself he was expected to be that evening. Stand straight, Hunter. Smile with your eyes. Speak when spoken to. Love was never spoken in that house. Expectations were. Hunter learned early that any softness he felt had to be hidden. The longing he carried, the tenderness that fluttered when a boy's hand brushed his by accident in the school hallway, those were shadows he was not allowed to cast. His heart became something to manage, a problem to solve. The world his mother built had no room for cracks and no tolerance for anything less than perfect reflection. By the time he was a teenager, Hunter moved through his life like a ghost wrapped in shining armor. He aced his classes, wore his suits like a second skin, smiled on cue during endless campaign fundraisers. He became so good at pretending that even he sometimes believed it was enough. At night, though, when the lights dimmed and the house settled into its cold silence, Hunter would sit by the window and watch the stars and wonder what it felt like to live without performance stitched into your skin. When whispers of his private truth started to hum through the private school hallways, suspicious glances, cruel smirks, questions that weren't really questions, Hunter clamped down harder. He buried the boy he was under layer after layer of duty. He told himself that loyalty meant silence, that survival meant erasure. He watched his mother ascend year after year, gaining power, gaining admiration, building an empire on a foundation that demanded his obedience. Each photo op, each glowing news article, each staged moment of family unity tightened the cage a little more around his ribs. He could not afford mistakes. He could not afford truth. He kept telling himself that the reward would come later, that someday, once she had everything she wanted, she would look at him not as a prop, but as a person. That maybe she would see the boy who stayed even when it broke him to stay. The illusion held until the night of the victory party, when Hunter, dressed in the dark blue suit his mother had chosen, stood on the margins of the celebration, feeling the walls of his life closing in. And then, without warning, without permission, he chose himself. He reached for the hand of the young man who had been a quiet, hidden part of his life for too long. He stepped forward into the light of the cameras, into the roar of the music and the buzz of 1,000 eyes, and he refused just for one breathless moment to hide. The world cracked open around him. He never saw the blow coming. Not from the outside world, but from home. The betrayal was swift, merciless, clinical. Before midnight fell, he was no longer the shining sun. He was the scandal to be cleaned up, the broken ornament to be swept aside. Hunter didn't walk away that night because he was brave. He walked away because he had finally seen the truth. There was no place for him in a life that only valued what he could pretend to be. There are moments in life when you realize survival is not enough. Moments when you have to choose whether you will keep shrinking yourself to fit a world that was never made for you, or whether you will risk everything for a life built in your own image. Hunter chose the risk, and that night, standing alone under a bruised sky with nothing but a crumpled jacket and a shaking heart, he stepped into the uncertain dark. Not to run, not to apologize, but to begin. If Hunter's journey resonates with you, if you've ever had to choose yourself over the life others scripted for you, Day with Heart Stories, subscribe and follow us, because here every story of survival deserves to be heard. The night Hunter left, he carried nothing but the clothes on his back and the fragile weight of a choice he couldn't take back. His world shrank to the cold interior of a battered sedan, borrowed from a friend too kind to ask questions. Streetlights flickered past in bleary streaks as he drove nowhere in particular. Just away. Just anywhere that wasn't standing in her shadow. By dawn, he found himself in a town that didn't know his name. A town without marble floors or polished speeches, where he could disappear into the cracks like rainwater slipping through broken pavement. The first nights were the hardest, sleeping curled up in the back seat, jacket pulled over his face against the bitter wind. Hunter learned how much silence could hurt. Without the constant noise of approval to chase, the echo of his own breathing felt too loud, too empty. He missed things he hated himself for missing. The sharp click of his mother's heels in the hallway, the faint clink of a teacup being set too hard on the kitchen counter. The illusion that even disappointment was a form of attention. Hunter survived on instinct. Gas station coffee, cheap sandwiches, public library internet, to search for jobs that required no RSUM, no references. He shrank himself smaller with each passing day, as if by occupying less space he could dodge the ghost of the life that had spit him out. What money he had quickly evaporated. There were nights he counted change on the dashboard with shaking fingers, deciding between gas for the car or a cup of soup from the diner that didn't ask questions. If you sat in the back, still he stayed away. He could have called. He could have apologized for breaking the image, could have begged for a place back at the table he now understood had never really been set for him. But survival had already demanded too much pride. He would not offer it up again. The days bled together. He found temporary work hauling boxes for a moving company, his back aching, palms blistered raw by rough rope and splintered crates. He picked up graveyard shifts at a dingy laundromat pushing carts of wet clothes until dawn broke gray across the cracked windows. Hunter learned the brutal math of survival. How many hours it took to earn enough for a night in a motel, how much colder a car grew after midnight, how hope became a muscle you stopped flexing after too many stretches of disappointment. And yet somewhere under the hunger, the exhaustion, the endless mechanical motions of scraping by something unexpected, stirred freedom. Not the blinding, triumphant kind sung about in anthems, but the quiet, ragged freedom of breathing without waiting for permission, of existing without constantly adjusting himself to someone else's expectations. In the muted corners of forgotten diners and empty laundromats, Hunter started scribbling in an old notebook he found abandoned on a bus stop bench. Not speeches, not apologies. Stories, half-formed memories, fragments of dreams he once dared to have before ambition became a cage. He wrote about the boy who stared at the stars from a window seat, wondering if there was a place beyond the perfect photographs. He wrote about the feeling of warm hands and laughter, unpracticed and real. He wrote about homes built from kindness rather than reputation. It wasn't much. It wouldn't fill a resume or polish a future, but it was his every broken line and shaky sentence. One rainy evening after finishing a shift scrubbing toilets at a strip mall, Hunter stumbled upon a small flyer tacked to a telephone pole. LGBTQ+ Youth Center. Volunteers needed. The address was scribbled in fading ink, the paper curling at the edges as if daring the world to forget it existed. Hunter stared at it, rain soaking through his sleeves for a long time. He didn't go that night. Fear kept his feet planted on the soaked sidewalk. Fear of rejection, fear of being seen too clearly. But the next evening he went, the center was no palace. Its ceiling leaked in 3 places. The chairs were mismatched and scarred, and the heater coughed more than it hummed. But the faces he found inside were different from any he had known before. Open-wary maybe, but real. No one asked for credentials. No one cared about headlines or family names. They cared about showing up, about surviving. Hunter didn't know it then. But stepping through that chipped door was the beginning of a different kind of life. Not one built on adoration, not one propped up by applause. A life built on something far stronger, belonging without condition. In the flickering fluorescent lights of that battered room, Hunter found the first fragile threads of a home he could claim as his own. He just didn't know yet how much farther he would have to go to make it real. At the youth center, Hunter didn't start by saving anyone. He started by sweeping floors and folding donated clothes that smelled of mothballs and old hope. He showed up when he said he would stay, after everyone else left. Repaired chairs cleaned, clogged drains painted over graffiti with colors too bright for the tired walls. There was no parade for this work, no interviews or applause. Only the quiet nods of exhausted kids who recognized something in him they couldn't name. In their sidelong glances and tentative smiles, Hunter found the kind of connection he had never earned from speeches or stage photographs. He became the person he once needed. Steady, patient, painfully human. The center operated on a shoestring budget. Lights flickered, leaks returned faster than they could be patched. Some nights Hunter and a few others pooled their tips from service jobs just to keep the heater running through the worst of the winter. Every small victory, fixing a broken washing machine, finding a grant that paid for new mattresses, felt monumental a rebellion against the slow erosion that poverty and rejection carved into young lives. Hunter learned to measure success differently, not in trophies or titles, but in moments. The first time a new kid dared to laugh out loud. The tentative trust in a voice asking if it was okay to stay another night, the way shoulders unclenched over cheap pizza and battered board games. He didn't save everyone. Sometimes kids left and didn't come back. Sometimes the world swallowed them before he could help. Each absence carved a new hollow into his chest, but he stayed. He kept the lights on. Some nights after the center closed and the city's neon glow softened into something almost tender, Hunter would walk the few blocks back to his tiny rented room and sit by the cracked window. He would think about all the years he spent chasing approval, like a starving dog, and wonder how he had survived so long without knowing what real belonging tasted like. It tasted like burnt coffee shared on a chipped kitchen table. It tasted like laughter stitched over bruised memories. It tasted like freedom, raw and unfiltered. It was during one of those quiet nights that Hunter realized survival wasn't the goal anymore. It wasn't enough just to endure. It was time to build. The center needed more than patch-in roofs and scraped-together donations. It needed security permanence, a home that couldn't be swept away by political tides or economic collapse. Hunter began researching late into the night, learning about nonprofit management, grant-writing city ordinances. He scribbled notes on backs of receipts, napkins, discarded flyers. Every minute he wasn't working shifts or volunteering, he was building the bones of a dream bigger than anything he had dared admit even to himself. He reached out to local businesses, pitched small fundraisers, wrote letters so long and raw they sometimes blurred before he could finish. Most doors closed in his face, some opened just a crack. He learned resilience, not as an abstract virtue, but as a daily grinding choice. Each no sharpened his determination. Each setback reminded him of all the nights he had endured alone, all the promises he had made to kids too tired to believe in promises anymore. Over time, something began to shift. A retired carpenter offered to help renovate the center for free. A bakery down the street agreed to donate leftover bread and pastries each morning. An anonymous donor paid for new water heaters after a freezing storm burst the pipes. Hunter never found out who that donor was. Part of him suspected Micah. Part of him preferred not to know. It didn't matter. The world, it seemed, contained more quiet kindness than he had been taught to expect. With every repaired window, every stocked pantry shelf, every handmade welcome sign tacked above the front door, Hunter wove a new kind of story. Not one crafted for public consumption, but one built from the stubborn insistence that discarded people still deserved warmth, safety, dignity. The kids changed too. Some stayed for weeks, some only for a night, but each left something behind: a painting pinned to the corkboard, a scarf forgotten on a coat hook, a memory of someone who didn't look away when they needed help. Hunter's own scarred places didn't disappear. They didn't need to. They became the roots anchoring him to a life no longer defined by rejection. He understood now that you didn't have to erase your history to build something better. You only had to refuse to let it be the whole story. One evening, standing outside the center beneath a bruised purple sunset, Hunter watched a group of kids laughing as they dragged folding chairs into a circle on the cracked pavement. Someone had brought a guitar, someone else passed around a bag of marshmallows, half of them already melted together. Hunter leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, and smiled. Not the polished, careful smile of political events, but something rougher, realer. It struck him then with a force that knocked the breath from his chest. This was his legacy. Not the headlines, not the exile, not the name that once weighed on him like a shackle. This, a place where survival wasn't the finish line, but the starting point. A place where broken things weren't thrown away but mended, celebrated, made strong again. Hunter stayed outside long after the laughter faded and the porch light buzzed to life above him. The world around him remained as indifferent, as chaotic as ever. But inside the small, battered building, a different kind of world had taken root. It wasn't perfect, it was better. It was real, and this time no one could take it from him. Hunter thought he had buried the past beneath enough good work, enough late nights, enough rebuilt lives that it could no longer touch him. But the past has a way of finding cracks. It arrived in a manila envelope dropped anonymously at the center's reception desk. One gray morning, Hunter recognized the seal before he even opened it, the familiar official branding of the Whitmore campaign machine. His hands went cold, but his face stayed still as he carried it into his office and shut the door quietly behind him. Inside was an invitation, a formal request for Hunter to appear at a reconciliation press conference, a staged photo opportunity to showcase the senator's support for all families regardless of differences. It was a command dressed as an olive branch, an offer not of healing, but of erasure. There was no apology. No acknowledgement of the years spent surviving in shadows while Martha Whitmore rebranded herself as a champion of inclusion. They didn't want Hunter back. They wanted his image, his compliance, his forgiveness, packaged into a neat soundbite to be aired between campaign commercials. Hunter sat at his battered desk, the letter trembling slightly in his hands, and felt an anger rise, not the white-hot rage of betrayal, but the colder, heavier kind born from years of being expected to perform gratitude for crumbs. He thought of the kids who slept under the patched roof he had fought to hold over them. He thought of the center they had built with scraped-together dollars and unstoppable hope. He thought of himself curled up in the back of a rusted car, believing for too long that survival alone was enough. There were things in this world too sacred to sell back to the people who had discarded them. Hunter didn't attend the press conference. Instead, he wrote a letter for steady final. I have already found my family. I don't need to return to a place that taught me love was conditional. He didn't mail it. He didn't need to. Saying the words to himself was enough. But the past was not done with him yet. A week later, the smear campaign began. Carefully leaked stories questioning the financial practices of the center. Whispered accusations that Hunter was exploiting vulnerable youth for personal gain. Old photos twisted out of context. Headlines splashed with cruel insinuations. It was never about truth. It was about control, about reminding him that no matter how far he thought he had run, power had long arms and a longer memory. The first time the police showed up at the center's door, Hunter's heart nearly stopped. A routine inquiry. They said anonymous tips. Allegations of mismanagement. Paperwork had to be reviewed. Hunter cooperated fully. He opened every file, every ledger, every receipt painstakingly kept. There was nothing to hide. Years of running a place on transparency and grit left no dark corners to exploit. But the damage wasn't in the investigation itself. It was in the fear it planted in the kids who had finally dared to trust that someone wasn't lying to them. Hunter watched the way they shrank back, the way laughter faded from the common room, replaced by whispered doubts. He felt the rage coil inside him, not because his reputation was under attack, but because, once again, innocent lives were collateral damage in a war they hadn't started. He gathered everyone into the main hall one evening. The same hall where dreams were patched back together with poster paint and secondhand guitars. Hunter stood at the front of the room, hands steady, voice clear. They will say a lot of things about me, he said, looking into the wary, familiar eyes turned toward him. They already have, and maybe some people will believe them. Maybe even some of you will. I can't stop that. He swallowed hard, feeling the lump of every word he wished he didn't have to say. But this place, he continued, his voice growing firmer. This home we built together, it is real, it is yours. It was never about me, and it doesn't rise or fall because of me. Silence fell over the room, thick with 100 unnamed fears. Then from the back, a boy no older than 16, still skittish around adults, raised his hand, not for permission, but in a quiet, stubborn show of solidarity. Others followed, a hand here, a nod there, until finally the whole room shimmered with a fragile, defiant kind of hope. They stayed. The investigation found nothing. It ended not with a dramatic announcement, but with a dusty file quietly closed. But by then it didn't matter. The battle had already been fought, not in courtrooms or newspapers, but in the hearts of the people who had refused to be stolen again. Hunter learned something in those dark months he would carry with him forever. You don't win by proving yourself to people determined to misunderstand you. You win by refusing to become what they accuse you of being. When the final letter arrived, a curt notification that all inquiries had been officially dropped, Hunter didn't celebrate. He didn't even smile. He simply stood outside the center that evening, watching the sunset stain the sky, gold and crimson, and let himself feel the strange, aching fullnesses of still being here, still standing, still choosing to build, even when destruction would have been easier. Inside, music played from a secondhand speaker. Laughter bounced off the battered walls. Life went on, ragged and beautiful and real. Hunter slipped the envelope into the nearest trash bin without opening it. Some victories didn't need a headline. Some homes didn't need a seal of approval. They just needed to be lived in fiercely and freely. And Hunter at last was living. By the time the storm passed, something had shifted in Hunter. Not a return to peace, but the slow recognition that peace was never meant to return. It was something you built with your hands, with your silence, with your refusal to leave. The center survived the attacks, not unchanged but stronger. The kids still joked and argued and left socks on the floor. Donations came more steadily, now quiet gestures from people who had watched him stand his ground and decided it meant something. A bookstore sent 10 boxes of paperbacks. A grandmother mailed a hand-stitched quilt with a note that simply read, "For the brave ones." Hunter didn't reply to those notes. He didn't need to. Their weight lived on the couch cushions, the filled pantry, the warm light glowing from the kitchen window late into the night. And then something impossible happened. The city approved a grant unexpected large, the result of a single committee member who had once been a scared, closeted teenager in a town that didn't make room for softness. The money was earmarked for one thing: building a permanent space, a real house, not borrowed, not falling apart, a place made for staying. Hunter stood on the empty lot the grant would pay to transform and didn't speak for a long time. He let the wind move past him, let the dust cling to his shoes. He could see it even before the blueprints arrived: the kitchen with chipped mugs lined up on open shelves, the sunroom with a battered couch and no judgment, the front steps where no one would ever again be told they were too much or not enough. He named it the second home. Construction moved slowly, as these things do. But when it opened nearly a year later, it was everything he had imagined and less perfect, which somehow made it more sacred. No ribbon-cutting ceremony. Just a handmade sign above the door, and a crowd of kids and friends and neighbors carrying boxes. Beanbags, a dented microwave. Someone brought a stray cat that never left someone else. Strung up colored lights around the front window that stayed on through the winter, blinking like heartbeat. Hunter moved into the small room upstairs. It had no doorbell, but kids knocked anyway, just to say hi or ask about college applications or tell him they made it through another hard day without running. Sometimes in the quiet moments between dinner and the nightly chaos of teenage life, he would sit on the porch and let himself feel what he used to be. Too afraid to want permanence. He had learned that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant giving the pain new context. It meant saying, "I lived through that, and still, I stayed open." On the anniversary of the center's founding, someone made him a cake. It was too sweet and slightly burnt, but everyone cheered when he blew out the candles. After the plates were scraped clean and music faded into soft chatter, a kid barely 17 newly out asked Hunter how he did it, how he forgave, how he kept going. Hunter looked at them and said the only honest thing he could: "I didn't do it alone. I just stopped believing I had to be someone else to be worth staying for." That night, after the laughter drifted into quiet and the dishes were done, Hunter stood in the doorway of the second home and looked out at the moonlight washing over the cracked sidewalk. The worn welcome mat, the world he never thought he had belonged to. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he was waiting to be let in. He was already home. Have you ever had to build your own version of home because the one you were given wasn't enough? We'd love to hear your story in the comments. You never know who it might help feel less alone. Subscribe to Heart Stories, where stories of healing, survival, and becoming yourself are told with the dignity they deserve. Your truth belongs here.